Welcome, everyone. The Perth US Asia Centre and AIBX is pleased to welcome you to our Beyond Delhi series. Today we have the first of three, and our topic is Innovating New Australia Tamil Nadu Education Links. So my name is Sonia. I will be the moderator for today's session, and our panelists joining us are Ms. Ravneet Pawha, who is the Deputy Vice President Global of Deakin University. We have Ms. Vicki Thomson, the Chief Executive of the Group of Eight here in Australia. Professor Raghunathan Rengasamy, who is the Dean of Global Engagement for IIT Madras, and Ms. Monica Kennedy, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner with Austrade. We are also pleased to welcome Mr. Naveen Unni, who is the Managing Partner of McKinsey in Chennai, who will be providing a summation at the end of our discussion. I'd like to start off also by acknowledging that I'm on the lands of the Noongar people here in Perth, and we have an audience from all around the world joining us, including South Korea, United States, and Singapore. A special mention, of course, to our guests from India and Australia, an acknowledgement that we have former Premier of Victoria, Ted Baillieu on the call, as well as an acknowledgement of the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Calicut, Dr. Abdul Salam. Before we dive into it, I'd like to give a bit of a background on the Beyond Delhi series and why we've chosen to frame these dialogues in terms of Beyond Delhi. So a lot of the research around India-Australia relations helps Australians understand that India is best understood, especially the economy, as a collection of state economies with distinct structural drivers, policy settings, and networks. So in the context of Australia-India relations, if we want to build a mutually beneficial bilateral relationship, Australia needs to understand the commercial centres of Chennai, Mumbai, Bengaluru, as well as we understand Delhi. So that is why, in partnership with the AIBX, the Perth US Asia Centre is bringing you this program to broaden Australia's understanding of the emerging opportunities in India's major commercial centres and build the institutional and policy links to realise these opportunities. Why education? Well, when we talk about education, it's not just about increasing the number of Indian students coming to Australia. For the bilateral relationship, education signals increased engagement, collaboration, and the fact that Australia can be responsive to India's needs. And of course, in the Defining India-Australia strategy written by Professor Peter Verghese, education is identified as the sector of the future because it is a place where Australia has expertise and an area where involves itself in every aspect of India's economy. Why Tamil Nadu? Well, Tamil Nadu is one of India's largest economies, and it's a leading industrialized state. It has amongst the highest per capita incomes, the best health indicators, and lower poverty rates. It's also, importantly for the purposes of our discussion, the state with one of the highest gross enrollment ratios in higher education. So the state is often known as the education state, and given the importance of education to the bilateral relationship, we're very happy to be convening this dialogue. It is my pleasure now to introduce our very first speaker, Ms. Monica Kennedy, to make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And thank you to the Perth US Asia Centre for the partnership with AIBX in which we're engaging today. I'm really excited to be here with the distinguished panel members and distinguished guests and institutional personal members of our audience from India, Australia and around the world. Today I'm lucky enough to be joining you from Thredbo, which is in the snowy Monero region of Australia, and I acknowledge the Ngarigo people as the traditional custodians of this area, and I acknowledge the strong spiritual and cultural connections that they maintain with the High Country. I pay my respects to the knowledge holders and community members of the land and the waters, and to elders past, present and emerging. I think it's a fabulous topic that we're engaging in today. Thinking about how two-way partnerships between Australia and India can generate collaboration opportunities for Australian and Indian providers, of course, but how they can benefit students and how these kind of collaborations result in innovation and new ideas and new ways of working as a result of different cultural and knowledge bases. But most importantly, I think, and one of the things I love about working at Austrade and in the Australian government is it gives us an opportunity to look at business-to-business relationships that have distinct and positive impacts for individual people, and most importantly in this discussion, individual students. I think that we think about our relationship with Delhi quite often, and it's very visible to us. But Australia has many and deep relationships and active engagement in Tamil Nadu, as it does in Mumbai and Balangaroo, and I'm sure that we'll have some discussions at different times about those other two sites. But in Tamil Nadu, for example, I know that we have Ravneet Pawha and Professor Rengasamy on the call, and they'll talk about the very important relationship between IIT Madras and Deakin University. But we have other examples of where universities are working with industry in Tamil Nadu, Go Health, for example, in assisted in vitro fertilization, and the IVF clinics that are using these new technologies in order to be able to really improve fertility outcomes for people. These are important opportunities for Indian and Australian industry and universities to work together. In the Andhra Pradesh MedTech zone also, University of Wollongong is working with that AMTZ to set up 3D bioprinting and to produce things that will assist us in transplants in the future. So industry and universities engagement is absolutely critical, and often this industry university engagement can support educational engagement in ways that is really innovative and can move both of our countries and our people forward. Of course, other education linkages, direct education linkages in Tamil Nadu are ones that are very well developed. And for us, we're very, very keen in engaging potential students in STEM, healthcare and management in particular from Tamil Nadu. We've engaged with a number of institutions in Tamil Nadu and in Australia. Our capability in higher education, in T&E and in EdTech are areas where we think there's incredible opportunity for more growth. In transnational education in particular, looking for opportunities to find new ways of working together for universities in Australia and Tamil Nadu to work together through changes in the NEP. And as those guidelines are worked through and we understand better how universities can collaborate, we are working very, very hard with Australian institutions very enthusiastically as part of our Accelerate program at Austrade to find where there is a great joint opportunity for engagement and exciting outcomes for universities in both our countries, but absolutely critically important for the myriad opportunities for our students under these new ways of working between institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I'm glad you brought up NEP. We have Professor Rengasamy, who has recently been talking with the University College of London on that very topic. Professor, I now invite you to make your remarks.
Thank you, Sonia. So I am here at IIT Madras in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, in a beautiful 640 acres wooded campus. I hope that all of you have the opportunity to visit our campus. You'll see deer and monkey. We co-live with animals in a very peaceful and nice fashion. So my job is essentially looking at international collaborations from IIT Madras. And this office actually started about 2007. So it's been around for 14 years. We have about 280 MOUs with different universities all over the world and 19 joint doctoral programs. These are big numbers for India. India has been largely, I would say, insular in terms of their colleges and so on for many decades, but things have really changed and things have opened out. It would be interesting for the audience to know that Australia is our largest partner. Of the 19 JDPs, we have 7 JDPs with Australian universities. And traditionally, IIT Madras has had a wonderful relationship with several Australian universities. Deakin, for example, there is a center of excellence between Deakin and IIT Madras. So we have traditionally had a very good engagement and relationship with Australian universities. And we are really looking at, as Sonia mentioned, real bilaterally moving students both ways so that it's enriching students from both directions. Just to give you some idea of the possibilities, we are really looking at joint programs, academic programs. As you know, Tamil Nadu government wants to make Tamil Nadu the global hub for universal education. So we would like to do our part in that. So we have several programs where we can collaborate with Australian universities. And later I will talk about very specific things that Australian universities could possibly think about doing, particularly in Tamil Nadu, given the new education policy initiative, which has tremendous potential for universities from abroad to help India achieve her ambitious goals. So I hope that events like this bring awareness and the ability to work together so that it's mutually beneficial to both our countries. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Professor. That's a great segue to Ms. Pawha's comments. I know recently that Deakin has worked with Tata in a COVID response partnership, and I'm very interested to hear, Ravneet, on your reflections on the topic.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you to all my panelist members as well. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to the audience today. I speak from New Delhi at this point of time. And my association with Australian education is over 3 decades old. So I remember starting off in India when Australian education was not ready to engage internationally. And Deakin has been around for 27 years of that time. So it's been a wonderful long journey, personally and professionally, for me. Deakin, has been engaging in different ways with India specifically, and more so recently in COVID times, I think we have been able to innovate our ideas, thoughts, and processes of partnership and engagement with the sector. I can very safely say that, with the NEP, it has been a little bit easier to really work with educational institutions and to really think about out of the box, because otherwise, traditionally, India has been fairly closed, in offering credits, offering mobility programs. Other than research, it has been really difficult to engage with India. But with NEP, I think, and if I can just very quickly talk about what that means for Deakin, it has been extremely engaging around the multidisciplinary approach that it has in the research ecosystem that institutions are setting up. The focus on doing away with the very solid structural approaches in the box. Governance and leadership, academic freedom, internationalization and accreditation as part of their strategy. So in all, I think it's really a great time for Australia and India to engage around education, training, and research. And at Deakin University, in the 1.5 years, we focus a lot on the EdTech platforms, and we've done quite a lot of work with industry as well as academia. We've had a partnership with the Tata Management Training Center, which is based out of Chennai. And we've devised programs and actually implemented specific programs right from the CEO level, to the middle managers level in terms of dealing with the COVID situation and new styles of leadership, and also looking at how one can look at digital transformation in organizations. So we've worked with Tata Capital, we've worked with Tata Insurance companies. We've worked with Advanced Materials, Tata Defense, and now with Tata Columbia. So it's quite interesting. We've sort of gone international with the Tata Group. We're also working very closely with TCS Ion, which is the EdTech platform of the Tata Group, where we are going to be looking at joint initiatives and joint programs to be delivered to India as well as internationally. And that platform is a very, very engaging, a very, very collaborative platform where we can bring in Deakin programs as well as create new programs with joint effort and collaboration. So, with sort of education at the forefront of the Australia-India relationship, as we call it, the flagship sector, I have no doubt that going forward, it is going to be a very, very important part of the bilateral relationship, and also working closely, I think, with the sort of prime ministers talking about it in June last year, and then, the comprehensive strategic partnership, all of that ties in very well with where the education, training, and research sector between the two countries is going.
Thank you, Ravneet. And I encourage our audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please do put them in the chat, and we may get to them when we get to the discussion. But before we open up for a discussion and welcome your questions, I'd like to now hand over to Vicki Thomson.
Thank you very much, and great to have this opportunity to talk to you and to the audience. Ravneet really has pointed out, I think, the essence of the partnership. Really, 27 years Deakin has been, in India. What a fantastic achievement! And I think the proof is in the pudding that, if we have these long-lasting relationships, we've got to be in it for the long haul. And so I thought what I'd do in my short time before we open for discussion is talk about exactly that. You need to understand the context of the partnerships that we have, particularly as the nation's research-intensive universities, the Group of 8. And while some of our university members do incorporate a state-based approach in their engagement with India, the approach of the Group of 8 as an entity, if you like, as the 8 universities, has been based on working with the right university partners, and particularly Indian research institutions, which then provides a gateway for collaboration with academics and students from that state. And these are partnerships that go back decades and decades. And with its strong reputation, obviously it won't surprise you that in Tamil Nadu, IIT Madras has featured very heavily in our strategic engagement with that state. So in the past, I think the best way to characterise our approach has been around 5 different areas. So obviously providing higher education to Indian students at our Group of 8 universities. Everybody who's involved in this particular call know that Australians universities enrol a lot of Indian students, over 90,000. The Group of 8 universities surprisingly have a very small proportion of that number. Our focus is very much in the international space on research. We do 70% of Australia's university-based research, and so we do attract less Indian undergraduate students than other Australian universities, but proportionately much more of our doctoral research students. So almost 40% of all Indian students undertaking a higher degree by research are doing so at a Group of 8 university. And we value those students, immensely. And Peter Varghese did highlight this in his report, because not only is that critical to our research collaboration efforts, but when they graduate, they also connect their Indian peers into joint research partnerships with us and with industry, which is a very strong focus for our 8 universities. The second characteristic is obviously delivering joint PhD programs across both Australia and India, and there's numerous examples of that, which I won't go into now. Thirdly, undertaking joint research, and we've done that for many, many years. Joint teaching opportunities, which provide an opportunity for students of both countries, COVID notwithstanding, to experience the sort of the knowledge sharing and the intellectual approach of academics from both countries. And leveraging the New Colombo Plan, something that I'm very passionate about. I'm on that New Colombo Plan reference group. Clearly there's a pause on that at the moment with the situation we've got now, but it's just such a good opportunity where we can send from Australia our best and brightest to Indian universities to learn from top Indian academics and immerse themselves in Indian culture and history. But of course, COVID has turned our world literally upside down, and that includes how we can continue to engage with India, and particularly with our Indian students, our researchers and our industry partners. And as I said, our borders are, of course, creating a significant challenge for Australian universities to attract talent from around the globe, and especially given the global preference for face-to-face tuition. And of course, research partnerships are very much about people-to-people relationships. And we also know that Indian students have a reputation for being more price sensitive and migration driven than many other countries in the Asia Pacific region. And migration pathways into Australia through study are obviously much harder without prior residency in country. For our higher degree by research students, which is predominantly our PhD students, those who are in joint research programs and are currently in India, they have sat tight, they've continued their studies, and that's a fantastic thing. But we've got to look at how we not only retain those students, but actually how we grow that pipeline and build those collaborative efforts in a post-COVID strategy. So I guess to date, the context of telling you that is it's really been to maintain our engagement with existing students, enhance our academic and pastoral support for our students, and to work on broadening and deepening our relationships with our existing Indian university partners. And then that's overlaid by what we do as a secretariat, if you like, in terms of positioning the group of 8 in the market, if you like, in India. In terms of looking at new ways, I guess it's really a little bit more of the same, in that we need to keep those partnerships and we need to leverage those partnerships. And we're always looking at creative and innovative ways to shape that international engagement. Of course, India is no exception. To build a strategy that works in India and focuses on quality, you have to underpin it with those deep embedded partnerships. And so that part won't change. And as I said at the beginning, and that was the great example that Ravneet gave, it's a long, slow game, and we have to be in it for the long haul. COVID is with us for a long time. We all understand that, but it shouldn't change the depth of our relationship and the embedded nature of that. And we have a great opportunity. We know that India has the largest tertiary age population in the world, so there's plenty of opportunities. As a group of universities, we are certainly interested in scale, but it must not come at the cost of quality. And so that is, something we are doing, is looking to widen our focus to non-university partners, especially to industry, for both research, entrepreneurship, and then build that depth into new partnerships so that we can work them to their full potential. So I'll stop there because I'm sure there are many questions for all of us, but that's a very rapid overview of kind of where we sit as a group of 8.
Thank you, Vicki. This has been a really positive discussion and a very rosy picture of where the status quo is in terms of Australia-India education links, and even especially with Tamil Nadu. I might ask the first question from the CEO of the Perth US Asia Centre, Professor Gordon Flake. He has asked, with the global spread of the Delta variant, it seems that the time frame for open borders has been pushed back. So what should government and universities be doing today to ensure that we are ready for when borders do open? In particular, are there any messages that need to be emphasised? Vicki, I might start with you in response to that question, as it is to do with Australia's borders.
Thanks very much, Sonia, and thanks for the question, Gordon. And it's completely relevant, isn't it? Because it does look like our borders will be closed for some time yet. And it's exercising the minds of all of our universities, both whether it be with undergraduate students or our postgraduate students. I think the single most important thing we can do, and government is doing that, is around our messaging and our signalling, that we are open for business, even if we're not open for business in a literal sense. Our borders shouldn't be what stops us from continuing to build and leverage those partnerships and relationships that I've talked about. So certainly from an institutional perspective, our universities are on the ground, in situ, in country, working those partnerships and relationships. From the government perspective, and we've got Austrade with us today, never have they been more important for us, I think, both as a nation but also as universities, to continue to send that message that we are open for business and we want to continue that partnership. So really, it is about communication and messaging at this particular time from our perspective.
Professor Rengasamy, I might ask you to pick up on some of the themes in this question. So you said you had 280 MOUs and many of them will be with countries with open borders. Are you seeing a difference in your work in global engagement between countries like Australia with closed borders and those like with the UK or the US? Has that affected how you collaborate with international universities?
No, I don't think it matters at all. This is a very short-term phenomenon. And I think you can't make any wholesale strategy changes based on all these short-term perturbations, I would say. So we don't look at it that way. But by the way, India has, been allowing people to come in, and some of our students are going abroad. But it doesn't mean that we have open borders, right? The numbers are still very small. So I expect the numbers to be small till the summer of next year, to be honest. And so it's a very graded policy that we have. So we are not making any wholesale changes. And as Vicki pointed out, a lot of work is done before the mobility actually happens. So in some sense, we have really structurally changed our office, and we have made lots of new programs that can leverage what is about to happen, hopefully in a year, when mobility will be much better. So we are putting in programs, we are putting in structures and processes in place that can definitely leverage once the mobility starts. And I assume there will be a lot of appetite for mobility, given that all of us have been sitting at home, and we want to be ready to take advantage of that. So the short answer to your question is, I don't think we are categorizing countries as open, closed borders, and so on. We are just doing things as we would normally do, waiting for better times.
I think for those of us in Australia, and especially in the education sector, that's a real big relief to hear. Professor, I might stick with you for the next question. In your opening remarks, you said you had specific ideas for what Australia can do to increase the already vibrant engagement. I'm keen to hear those ideas.
So from the NEP viewpoint, right, actually Tamil Nadu is doing quite well. In terms of numbers, if you think about it, India is hoping to get a gross enrollment ratio of about, I think, 50% by 2030. Tamil Nadu is already at 51.4%. India is at 27.1%, right? So Tamil Nadu is already doing very well. However, one of the important things that NEP mentions in terms of higher educational institutions is the fact that the NEP allows more flexibility so that institutions can go through a graded path to different levels. So for example, a college like IIT is pretty much autonomous, right? But there are several other colleges, private engineering colleges, which are single discipline colleges and so on. So there is a graded path for these colleges to go to larger university structures, more research intensive colleges or teaching intensive colleges and so on. So there is a graded path of how these colleges can keep getting better and better so that they serve the population by 2030. Now in Tamil Nadu, for example, there are about 2,600 colleges and engineering colleges, and about 76% of them are private and unaided. So these are colleges which have been started by individuals, groups of individuals, and so on. And these are in a very competitive marketplace. And the NEP allows a structure by which these colleges can go and move on to become universities together or by themselves and so on. Now, in India, at a higher education level, there's a lot of problems, and there is definitely a resource crunch, right? So we need a lot more people engaged in this if this were to happen. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for both India to reach out and get the expertise and then help these colleges through the path that NEP envisages for them. NEP is a more policy document. In fact, in the other panel, we talked about implementational details are really not there yet. And of course, the devil is in the details. So how do you implement things so that these kinds of colleges can really scale up? And I think universities in Australia and other countries can identify the best of these and then handhold them and then make partnerships. And that, I think, can help both Australia and India together. I think that's a wonderful opportunity that's there. I think a strategy to do that would be a good thing for Australian universities to think about.
Fascinating. The fact that there are 2,600 colleges is just a scale within one state in India is a scale that is very hard for many of us in Australia to comprehend. But as you said, provides huge opportunities for ways of working and engaging with India. Ravneet, I'm interested in how your approach at Deakin differs from state to state. So, for example, are you already doing work with private colleges in particular states, or do you have more of a presence in some states over the other, and what drives that difference?
Well, I think our strategy has been a countrywide strategy. So if you divide India into the sort of 4 regions, south, west, east, and north, we've been more active in the 3 regions, which is north, south, and the west. Not so much in the east. It's just by design, not by intention. But I think also the northeast and east is a slightly slow to turn market, and in my view, a little bit more UK focused market. Whereas I think our move in West has been more around, the arts and creative arts and digital technology kind of space. And we engage with both government and private institutions and industry. Like Vicki said, we need to really think about a strategy of an institution in a country like India, because you can't do everything with everyone, and that becomes the difficult thing. So we've had a strategy of education programs where we have joint programs. We have sort of joint degrees that can be offered, articulation programs at the undergrad and at the postgrad level. And then we've got this big research initiative, which is called Deakin India Research Initiative, which has about 100 projects going on in India with top 10 companies and academic institutions, including IIT Madras, where we have a joint center. And also IIT Hyderabad and IIT Guwahati, IIT Kanpur as well. These are pockets of excellence that India has, and universities work with these pockets of excellence for PhD programs. And we also work with industry on joint PhD partnerships. Like we have a very strong partnership with Indian Oil, with the Department of Biotechnology and Department of Science and Technology. Now, these things are countrywide, so they're not specific to any one region, because students could be based anywhere in the country and they participate in these kind of things. And the third area that Deakin engages is training, and that also I think is across the board over. But specifically coming to Tamil Nadu, our focus has been on more technical and emerging technologies kind of engagement and activity. We've got a great partnership with IIT Madras, IIT Hyderabad, joint PhD degrees there, joint center of excellence. We've just set up an Indian advisory board, with the top 6 companies who are going to advise us on projects that we can do with industry, which already has taken off very well. Also because India has specific needs for research, and Australia, and specifically here in this case, Deakin has specific expertise. So we are trying to marry that opportunity. We're working very well with GE in the energy space, based out of Bangalore. We are also working with MDRF, which is Madras Diabetes Center, on a couple of projects in diabetes and health. Also with some universities in Tamil Nadu, like sort of Amrita University, Shankara Nethralaya, across the health tech and the med tech area. So right from, I would say, education to research to training, there is an engagement across the country, but there are pockets of excellence and pockets of work specific to specific areas of engagement.
So what I'm hearing is that it's not even state by state, it's the granular level of institution by institution that Deakin operates around. And, I guess if that is the case, then is there anything government should be doing to enhance Australian universities' engagement in India, or is it a purely institutional driven endeavour? What should the Australian should the Australian government do to help universities engage in India, or is things so rosy that we don't need that? We've heard of the existing partnerships with Deakin, with Curtin, with Monash. I'm interested in your thoughts, Vicki, on, is there a role for government in this space?
There's definitely a role for government, and they are the sort of the really important partner in all of this for both the Indian and Australian governments. And things like the comprehensive partnership and reviving those discussions are really important, because they send really strong signals that India is a key market for us in all areas, not just in education. And I think that the Australian government is doing that, to be honest with you. We are being, in our discussions with government, we're certainly being asked to look at diversifying our market, building our sovereign capability, and looking for partnerships with like-minded countries in the region. And of course, India is the big like-minded country that's in the region that we would want to partner with. So, without sounding shallow, I think that signalling is really important. And I think the Australian government is doing that. It's not without its challenges, though. I mean, India is a really complex market. Let's not kid ourselves here. And I guess that was my point with, the success is in building the long-term relationships, which Deakin has done and which many of my universities have done. We have to continue to do that. And I think we will then see our way out of this COVID context because we've built those partnerships. The other aspect I think that's important, and again, I keep mentioning you, Ravneet, but you're mentioning everything that I sort of think is really important, are those industry linkages and having those partnerships with those industry players. So you've got government, industry, universities, and in government, I talk about Indian and Australian government. And that's why Austrade is so important for us. Having that presence in situ is really, really important. So sure, there are challenges. But in all of those challenges, I think there are many opportunities, and I think that the government and the universities recognise that.
Sonia, can I just come in and make a comment here, because I think it's quite relevant. I think what is the very important opportunity for Australian institutions to think about here is that India is at a threshold where it's changing its education system. And the professor, my colleague from IIT Madras, would sort of relate to this when I say it. And it has happened after 32 years of internationalization in the sector, but it has really come up now. I think the big opportunity for Australian institutions is really to try and understand the complexity of the Indian system and see where it can add value, whether it is on edtech platforms, whether it is on joint degrees, whether it is on research, because you can't find an institution. If today I want to find an institution in India where I can do education, research, and training, I can't do that, because there is one institution which is really good in research and in an area which is specific. And then, so you partner with that, because the Australian top scientists would want to partner with Indian top scientists, right? So you sort of build that. But there will be another institution that will perhaps be really good in another area, and you will have to build another relationship with that institution. So it is not an institution to institution relationship only. It is going to be a graded approach, but pockets have to be identified where Australian universities have strengths, can bring in their expertise and make it available at scale in India. I think that is the opportunity.
Monica, I welcome your reflections on Ravneet's comments about the complexity of the Indian higher education system. You come from higher education yourself, and so bring a unique set of expertise. And I'm really keen to hear how you intend to use that in your new role in Austrade, and where the convergence is between your previous work in higher education and your this new adventure you're setting foot on out to do in Mumbai.
Thanks, Sonia. And it is quite a new adventure. Just before I go into that, though, I would like to just go back to Vicki's comments about Austrade's role, or government's role, in being able to support continuity of relationships in the India-Australia engagement at this time, and Ravneet's suggestions about the ways that we can continue to work together on very specific institution to institution collaborations, but also more broadly. And there's 3 points really I'd like to talk about here about Austrade's involvement in a couple of major projects. So the first is AIBX. It's part of this discussion of this project today. And a major part of AIBX is about increasing literacy, bilateral literacy about how Australia and India work, and starting conversations to help us understand how businesses can establish and grow in partnership in that bilateral way. The second is some of the work that we've been doing in our really energetic attempts to continue to support Indian students, whether they're in Australia or abroad, and continuing that long relationship we have with this, a flow of students from India and between our nations. And that's with the Digital Education Hub. And it's a significant federally funded project, which includes a range of different facilities, including an employability hub, a course search and career matching service. It really is a significant piece of work. And then I think the third thing that I would talk about is the work that we're doing directly with institutions in Australia. So through our Accelerate program, Austrade is making contact with universities one by one, identifying opportunities for diversification. And for many universities, India is a major opportunity for diversification. And then making connections between governments in India, industry in India, universities and other providers in India, as well as edtech firms, for example, and making very discrete opportunities available. So converting what might be something that we believe in and want to talk about and we keep messaging, but converting that into very real opportunities. And so in those 3 ways, we're working really hard to make tangible outcomes from the opportunities at the moment.
I might ask Professor Rengasamy, I want to put you in an awkward position, but I would like to hear, going back to your comment about you have 280 MOUs, what in your experience what distinguishes an Australian higher education approach to an American, to a UK approach? So we know it's a highly contested market. Everybody with major higher education sectors wants a bite of India, wants to collaborate, wants those industry links, those research links. I'm interested for you to, if you're brave enough, to rank them, but avoiding an awkward situation, to kind of give us your understanding of how our countries differ in their approach, what might be good about some countries' approaches and what might not be good.
Okay, so I'm not going to rate them, of course. Each country is different. So I'll tell you the way we look at it from IIT Madras when we look at relationships. Australian universities, and you've heard many people talk before. So when we talk about collaborations, let's actually distinguish between 2 things. One is research collaborations. Another one is getting a piece of the undergraduate market, which is more the commercial aspect of it, I would say. Now, it's been very easy to do research collaborations with Australian universities. And I believe it's also partly because, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, when students do PhD in Australia, the government gives a certain amount of funding to the university. So you increase the number of graduate students and the funding for the university goes up. And if half of the time the student spends in India, where the funding levels are a little lower or IIT takes care of it, there is a natural benefit for Australian universities to do research collaborations with us. So I have found research collaborations to be really straightforward and so on. So in terms of research collaborations, what I would say we look for is actually a very simple thing. There has to be complementarity of skills. Very often, we do not want to receive expertise alone. We want expertise from here to be appreciated on the other side. And I feel Australian universities do that quite well. So whenever I have had meetings, I feel that there is a mutual give and take. There are other countries where, the idea is that we already know what we want to give you. So that kind of approach is the difference, I would say. So I would say I would rate Australia quite highly in terms of relation, not because I'm in this panel. That's actually a true view of what my experience has been. However, the other market, I think, which IIT Madras is not really in, because our programs are highly rated. We get to pick the best undergraduates in India. So to get undergraduate students to go to Australia and so on, I think it's a totally different strategy. And as many of your panelists have mentioned, India is a very complicated country. NEP looks at how to improve inclusivity, diversity, and so on. All of these are easy to say, very difficult to do. So that's a totally different segment I'm not addressing. But in terms of research partnerships, Australia rates quite highly for us.
Thank you, Professor. I hope you will forgive me. I thought coming from an IIT institution, you would be very happy to do ranking. But I'll now turn to a couple of questions from our audience. So one of them is from Canberra, and we have an audience member from the CIT in Canberra. And she has asked us, how can Australia promote and advocate the value of skills and vocational education to a market that has a strong bias towards university education? I'm interested to hear from Monica on this one, as I'm sure this is a big focus of your work.
Thank you, it is. I worked in the Canberra Institute of Technology at a time, maybe, 25 years ago. I have great respect for that institution. And I love the question, because I think vocational education and training is one of those major opportunities in India. I know that the new Minister for Education is incorporating a vocational education agenda and responsibility. And I think that this is a great opportunity for finding ways for skills to be incorporated in both schools education and also to be lifted in profile. Australia is known to have one of the best vocational education and training systems in the world. It is a significant source of pride for us and a significant basis on our ability to be able to deliver great skills. In India, there is a desperate need, as I understand, for skills and their recognition. And I think there's an opportunity for Australian institutions to work with major players in India to understand how we might be able to support in professional development, in the provision of good quality curriculum, and in the provision of small skills-oriented courses delivered face-to-face in India with Indian partners or online. And it's one of the very important tasks that our team will be working on in India, to be able to see how we can find an opportunity to support that incredible ambition in India for better skills training, sorry.
Thanks, Monica. Ravneet and Professor, as our India-based panelists, I'm interested in your reflections. I know vocational education is the opposite end of the spectrum of that we sit on, but culturally, how do we change governments or society's relationship with vocational education? And have you come across this in your work, the growing importance of this sector?
I can answer that, Sonia. Vocational training has been recognized as an important thing in India for a long time. I don't know how many of the panelists will know. We have had this setup called polytechnic institutions, which are supposed to impart vocational education. And then after you finish that, you can transition to a college degree and so on. I think it's been there all the time. How well it's been done is a different question altogether. But I would say one thing though, NEP really focuses on vocational training. And in fact, we don't have enough time. My view of this is actually, it's not only the model of vocational training for a shorter period of time where you give a skill is not only important for the vocational training bit itself, but I think it's going to become a very important part of university education itself. Because even in university education, the fields move so fast that you can't get a degree and then say, I live off this degree for the rest of my life. So I could have been a chemical engineer, and with that 4-year degree, I can live off the rest of my life and retire. But I believe my children will not be able to do it. My children in 20 years will have to think about what they're going to train in. So very short capsule courses that keeps even undergrad educated population re-educated is going to be a theme of the future. It might happen in the next 10 years, next 15 years, and 20 years. The template is the same, the concept is the same. So I think it's important to think of these things while we think about education much more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, if I can come in here and say that I totally agree with, Monica and Professor Ramaswamy, that at the end of the day, skills is an important part of education and training. And Australia does it beautifully with our TAFE segment embedded into the university sector and also operates independently. And I think that that sort of a model will work very well with India. So if you look at India's higher education institutions, you've got the very sort of limited, maybe 1% in the top institutions, and then a very big band in the middle, and then the tail end. Now the middle band is where I think, which we could say are the top 100 or 200 institutions in India, is where I think there is going to be the maximum impact of NEP. And skilling is an important part of that. It needs to be embedded into the system of higher education in India, such as it is in Australia. And I think that there is a lot for India to learn from Australia and how the Australian skilling and education sector works so closely. And like the professor said, that the past is the past, the present and the future is going to be about skilling and education sitting together. And I think that organizations like NSDC, and I've been involved in discussions over the years between all of these areas, there is a room to develop a model which is going to be high on quality and scalable on a digital platform. Now, those are the challenges that we as a sector need to address, but that is where the biggest opportunity does lie in the skilling sector.
And if I can just pick up there, I mean, I think that's really important that we don't characterize this as either or, that it's and that there is sort of porosity of movement, if you like. And I think Professor Rengasamy, you talked about short courses and micro-credentialing and all of those sorts of things. They need to happen across the spectrum, because, I was involved in a panel actually a few weeks ago just on India and workforce needs. Those workforce needs for the whole world actually, are going to be across the spectrum. And it's a continual learning environment now that wasn't there even a decade ago. And I think, there's a great opportunity for all of us working in any post-secondary education context to acknowledge that and to sort of not demarcate our kind of territory, but understand that we've got to work together. And I think that's true. We have a very good system here in Australia, but it's also something that we should be doing and kind of sharing as well.
Going on this similar theme of, higher education, and I'm still smarting from the loss of our hockey team to the Indian women's hockey team, so I won't dwell on that too much, but there is a sporting university being set up in Manipur in India by the central government. And given the medal tally, Australia obviously has expertise in this area, and India has huge potential, which as a major superpower is untapped. We don't see them up there alongside Russia and China, though they should be. I'm interested in your own work, Ravneet or Monica. Is there an appetite to collaborate with on disciplines that aren't maybe the focus of what we look at in Tamil Nadu, for example, manufacturing, STEM, health? Is there an appetite to get India's medal tally up through collaborating with Australia?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of make a quick comment there. Absolutely, Sonia, I think there is huge potential. In fact, just 2 days back, I was in a state, met the Minister for Education, and the first thing he said to me is that Deakin University is so well known for sports education and sports science and sports management. Would you like to partner with us to set up a world-class university in sports? Now, you start with that discussion from there, and then you start thinking about the what and the how and the COVID and, the price sensitivity and all of that. So it becomes difficult. But I guess what I'm trying to say there is that there is a huge need in this country for sports management and sports science. And I think Australian universities, including Deakin, have great expertise in the model and the know-how of that. So that is one huge sector. I remember when we started our Masters of Sports Management, in the first instance, I thought that, we may have a slow start given it's a niche area and given, students may not be interested. We actually had to cap the numbers because we just could not take that many students looking at sports management. So that's one area. The other initiative that we've done is that we have a strong partnership with an IPL team called the Rajasthan Royals team. And we have developed short-term training programs with them in sports, which are available at the moment online on a digital platform. And they've been hugely successful. So whether you talk about, a short capsule on sports marketing or merchandise, sports governance, sports analytics, of course, you're not becoming an expert, but this is like an upskilling for people who are in the sector and working in the sports sector, but wanting to upskill and reskill with a really strong qualification. And we've seen huge uptake of that program in the last 2 years.
And if I could just add very briefly to that, we haven't had an example yet of a university approaching us for support to engage for a new sports-oriented partnership. I've only been in the job for 120 days, so that it's not impossible that it would happen, but I'm certainly going to remember to talk with universities about that opportunity. But I would say that universities are very keen on diversifying their groups of students in India and using discipline to do that. So by identifying partners on the basis of specific disciplines outside of those disciplines that they normally would engage in for research or for enrolment of international students in order to diversify their student base. And I think it's a really good idea by identifying very specific good quality partners in an area where a university has a specific set of skills or courses or research ability in an area, and using that disciplinary basis to engage in really tight relationships in which we might have a breadth of activities underway from research, industry engagement and education.
We're slowly going to be wrapping up soon, but I do want to touch on some of the challenges that the G of 8 universities have in engaging with India, whether it's maybe on the, we split it into two, the research side and the commercial side. And we acknowledged that there are less undergraduate students coming to the G of 8 universities here in Australia. What are some of those challenges that you are finding your member institutions face?
Competition, and serious competition from the US, the UK, Canada. I mean, I think Canada are actually offering vaccinations and all sorts of things. I mean, it is such a commercial enterprise in terms of students. So competition is the big one. I think that if I'm speaking frankly, and I remember being on a visit to India, several actually, but with Prime Minister Turnbull when he was Prime Minister, and then with Minister Pine, the take-home message I got was that Australia was still not seen as a quality destination or as a high-quality area in terms of research. I mean, individual universities, of course, were, and we are, and we know we are, but up against like the Russell Group in the UK or the Canadian, the equivalent of the research-intensive universities, we were still at that point seen as kind of, cricket-loving sports. And it's interesting that you raise sport, which, as an aside, I had read today that if Griffith University was a country in Australia, I think they would be third on the medal tally or something. They've so many young students from Griffith have won gold medals for Australia, or medals for Australia, by the by. So I think that, so the challenge for us is to be able to get the message across that we are a quality destination, that we're more than just beaches and sunshine, that we are innovative, and we have a strong research base. I think that's really important. And again, I keep going back to this shared enterprise of doing that with government support and assistance and with our universities. And I guess for Group of 8 universities, where we sometimes perhaps limit ourselves, but where that competition is harder, is in that very high-end quality market of students. So we're looking for the top students, but we're looking for those top students against Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard. And so that pool, albeit that contextually it's large, it's not that large, if that makes sense. And so that's the student side. And I think just the complexity of the country and dealing with, you know, the different layers of bureaucracy, and, you know, that's where we really need help. And that's where we rely on either our own people who are in the country or our Australian government to kind of grease the path a bit for us. So complexity and competition, I think, are the two biggest challenges for us.
Thank you, Vicki. That's, I think, an important place to start to wrap up the discussion of, you know, we are doing really well in terms of the existing partnerships that exist, that are underway between the institutions that we've heard of from Ms. Pawha and Professor Rengasamy, but there is scope to go further and deeper, especially on the research side and with the Geo-8 universities. Before I invite Naveen, Unni to give some closing remarks, I'd like to just bring us back to Tamil Nadu. And if we are talking about high quality research and collaboration, what are the sectors of focus in Tamil Nadu? And especially I'd like to know, where is the demand, which I guess is related, from students in Tamil Nadu? We know they are enrolling in higher education at higher rates than the rest of India. Professor, I'm interested to know, you know, what are the sectors of importance within Tamil Nadu, but then where also is the demand from the students?
Yeah, so it's a very dynamic thing, Sonia. I just want to mention something. So we talked about sports science, right? So at IIT Madras, we have started a new Center of Excellence for Sports Science and Analytics, right? And lots of universities will start this because this is something that's needed in India. But anyway, outside of that, see, traditionally, Tamil Nadu and a lot of India has been very focused on engineering education. And this is a very traditional thing. You know, you become an engineer, you have a good life. And that was largely true because I think the opportunities were limited for other things. India economically has grown several folds from 3 or 4 decades before. So once the money is there, the opportunities are there. So I think it's too early to say that the trend has been bucked and it's not going to be engineering always, but I would still say engineering education is the top priority for students in Tamil Nadu and much of many other states. But slowly, lots of other arts and sciences and visual communication, languages and so on, when the world gets more and more interconnected, there is going to be opportunities here. Now, these opportunities are not there on the platter, I think. I think some amount of cultivation of these opportunities need to be done. Some amount of education of what is possible needs to be done. And if that is done, I think there are multiple things that one can look at. So simple answer is still engineering. But I think things are going to change in the next 5 to 10 years tremendously, particularly in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah. So if I can come in here very quickly and say that the other area, of course, that I think we see a trend in coming in through is around health technologies, you know, and also emerging technologies, use of AI, ML, you know, and things like advanced manufacturing, digital manufacturing. You know, those are some of the areas, of course, around research, but also I think students are looking at those kind of educational areas. I mean, if I can just wrap up my comments to say that India is complex, and at the end of the day, you know, the things that have worked for Deakin and for us has been about, you know, the 5 Ps that I normally talk about in my understanding of India is people-to-people linkages. You cannot do without that. You know, it is about having a passion, because it's a tough ride. And unless you have passion for this, you are not able to go far. persistence and patience. Like Vicki said, it is a long haul and it is going to be bumps on the way. So institutions will need to think about how they move into that journey. And good partners. I mean, without partners, you're very difficult to work in India or anywhere else in the world.
Thank you, Ravneet. Naveen, Unni, I now invite you to make the summation from what has been a vibrant discussion.
It has been. I mean, let me start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this meeting is conducted. I mean, the spiritual land on which this meeting is conducted is still Western Australia at Perth. So I should acknowledge the Whadjuk people of Noongar country and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Just a brief kind of the 2 minutes on me and why I'm doing the summation, probably. So I'm an IIT Madras alum from 20 years ago, professor. And I then joined McKinsey after an MBA, and I've been there 18 years. Half of that time I spent in Perth, and I only got back to Chennai about 6 months ago. And I started our office in Perth and know the Perth US Asia Center from there. They do really terrific work. So it's been really a pleasure to listen to this conversation. I also sit on the UWA Business School Advisory Board. So it's doubly interesting, right? Because from a higher education perspective and a G8 perspective, it's really a very interesting time. Because as Vicki described, we're in a time when getting undergraduates to Australia is hard. It is a highly competitive market. And several of the students, prospective students I've spoken to, do look at Australia from the twin benefits of a great quality of life and being there and migration, right? And so when those things become harder, it does get harder. And I've seen that at UWA, and I think it's generally true for the G8. But today I found was really fascinating because of the sense of optimism and opportunities that I heard. And just in summation, I think the first thing I heard was just the long history that India and Australia have shared. And Deakin as an example, but also Professor Rengasamy talked about the IIT Madras. And I did not know this personally, so it filled me with pride that 7 JDPs that you have are with Australian universities. But it's also not just the opportunities, but it's also founded on a basis of mutual respect. Which I think is fundamentally important, because when you have disturbances and issues like COVID are happening now, what will kind of see us through is the bedrock of the relationships, and the fact that they are based on mutual respect for what each party brings, I think is terrific. I also heard a sense of, while we're kind of seeing COVID, and I heard 2 different views on this, right? COVID is here to stay, but also COVID might be temporary. I think it's both true. We have to live with this world, and whether it's vaccine passports, I think at some point things should open up, and trying to signal the right things, as I heard from Vicki, and making sure that governments are signaling that we're open for business, even if we're not open for business, I think is fundamentally important. I think some of that signaling has come through, but eventually people vote with their wallets. And so how do we kind of see the next 6 to 12 months through in terms of the undergraduates and making sure that we still continue the relationships? I was emboldened by what Professor Rengasamy said, that people think about mobility over a period of time. So it's not like it's an immediate choice that people make. But I will be honest, I had an MBA student at UWA who's from India. He was one of my mentees a couple of years ago in the full-time MBA program. And I asked him, how did he learn about UWA? And he said, completely by accident. And so I do know that we could do a lot more to increase the visibility of the universities in India and all across India, but definitely in Tamil Nadu. So I think there's a question of continuing that visibility, continuing the signaling, because that's the strongest message that we still want you, right? When you're ready to move and when we're ready to welcome you. So I think that was a theme there. But the other interesting theme was the whole notion of collaboration. And Ravneet, you described the collaborations that Deakin is doing. It was terrific to hear, not just the research linkages, but also the industry linkages. And I can see on both sides, Deakin is definitely seen as an innovator and as bringing huge value to India right? In terms of the collaboration partnerships that you're bringing. And the question, of course, is what can the G8 do with that? And it's the same question I'm asking at the University of Western Australia as well, which is how do we bring more of that innovation? But a part of that is obviously having boots on the ground and making some investments proactively. If you believe this is a market that's here to stay, then I think some of those investments have to be made ahead of the curve, which I think Deakin has for 27 years, Ravneet, you mentioned. So it's been a long time. And it does take the time, right? And I don't think India is a complicated market, because when people tell me that in the 9 years that I was there, I often ask them, is it more or less complicated than China? And the answer is both. It's more in some ways and less in others, right? And Australia, we made the investment in China. So yes, we have made the investment in China before, and we've reaped the rewards. So I think it's time to shift and make the investment in India. And that's really where the difference comes out, is in the investment horizon. Just a couple of other opportunities that I want to call out in summation. The NEP, several people talked about the NEP being a game changer. And this is a moment of transition for the Indian education industry. And I call it industry, taking a kind of a commercial lens to it. And so several opportunities we talked about, whether it's in partnership with existing universities. Professor Rengasamy called out partnerships with colleges that are potentially on the pathway to universities. We spoke about vocational skills, the TAFEs and what the TAFEs can bring. In Western Australia, I've often spoken to leaders there about the big opportunity that we have in mining sciences and resources extraction. And my clients in India would kill for some of those skills, right? So I really think there's a huge opportunity in India, and now is the time to almost stay invested and overinvest to kind of reap the benefits. The final thought, we really didn't speak about EdTech, and I see that as a huge opportunity, and it can be a threat depending on how you see it. EdTech is really taking off, and again, Professor Rengasamy talked about re-education, reskilling. And it's a huge conversation in India, lots of investments happening, and I'm sure many of you are talking to some of the parties here. What is the role that Australia can play in both rethinking digital education in Australia, but also thinking about partnerships with Indian platforms and providers in both accessing India, but also the world, I think is a really important conversation. And look, we didn't have the time to cover everything, but that's just a question I'll put on the table, just given how much investment and interest EdTech is gathering. Billions of dollars have been invested, and I'm sure that billions more will be invested in that space. How can Australia make the most of it, I think is a question I would leave on the table.
Thank you so much, Naveen. Thank you, Ms. Pawha, Ms. Kennedy, Professor Rengasamy, and Ms. Thomson. We are really happy to have convened this in partnership with the AIBX program and Austrade. The Perth US Asia Centre will take the EdTech question and turn our minds to it and continue to be an advocate for Australia-India collaborations in the education space. Thank you to our audience for joining us from all around India, all around Australia, and all around the world. The next Beyond Delhi series will focus on Karnataka and the opportunity for super funds. And after that, we'll be going to Bengaluru, where we'll look at the digital gaming and digital animation opportunity between India and Australia. Thank you to our panelists, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.